All right, I think it's time for us to kick us off this event. Welcome all to today's webinar hosted by ShopCare. I'm your facilitator, Wes van Deventer. And our main speaker for today is from Think Farm, the Chief People Mechanic, John Peachy. Hi, John. Guys, just for everybody's information, this webinar is recorded and will be uploaded to our YouTube channel next week. It helps us to reflect a bit and learn more from it. So just bear in mind of the recording. If we can go to the next slide, please, John. All microphones are muted. So please make use of the question and answer functionality if you have any questions for John or myself. And please make use of the chat function for any other comments. At the end, we will do all the Q&As. If there's any time left and John is willing and there's still participants that are willing, that wants to do some live questions, I'll open up the lines for anybody to ask those types of questions. All right. Then just for a quick overview, before we move on, I just want to inform everybody that there will be poll questions, 4 poll questions to be exact, 3 right at the start and 1 at the questions and answer section. But they're very quick and easy, no real thought that has to be put into them. And also all live results are anonymous, so please feel free to answer honestly. Then just a quick overview of ShopCare, everybody. We're an industry association with a focus on health and safety, and we connect people to people and people to solutions. And our main aim is just to create safer workplaces sooner. Our current work streams are, for example, critical risks. We've done quite a bit in critical risk space. One is we've just finished a critical risk exposure report for the industries or sectors of transport, warehousing, retail, logistics, etc. And then we are just going through with some key stakeholders on those findings and insights before we make that public. You can also head onto our website to see other resources that we've got from a critical risks perspective. There's some hierarchies of controls there to help you out. We'll also host these types of webinars / sharing sessions for everybody that you can just jump on a particular critical risk, and we can share some experiences with the audience. I know there's quite a number of organizations and individuals that found them very of value. So we'll keep on doing these types of webinars or sharing sessions. Then another stream of work is violent and aggressive behavior. For those who don't know what that means, it's basically all public-facing workers that experience violence and aggressive behavior from the public. As one of our findings was that not just retail, but in other sectors as well, the cause of injury or from a critical risk perspective is hit by a person or injured by an animal. That animal is most probably from an agriculture point of view, but from a person it's more of the day-to-day retail worker space. So we are collaborating there with Skills VR, trying to do some de-escalation training and resources for everybody. And we're also collaborating with other organizations which are in partnership with other organizations which I can't mention just now, but we'll make that public very soon as well. We do have some other work streams when it comes to site markings where we work with WorkSafe. We're developing a site markings guide. Also, we are doing a bit around participative ergonomics. So please, yet again, head over to our website where you can see some participative ergonomics, manual handling training, etc., etc. We will do more on that space, so please watch out for us because we'll be able to do quite a bit in that area. Then lastly, before I move on to our poll questions, guys, you'll see there's a couple of faces here on the screen. These are just some of our up-and-coming webinars. Next up, we've got Sarah McGuinness, the founder of ROW, which is Revolutionises of Wellbeing, and she'll be discussing, and not just discussing, but also talking from experience when it comes to burnout, especially due to going through the whole COVID with the rest of us. So please watch out for that one. That one will be really interesting. And if I remember correctly, that is happening next week. So please make sure that you register for that event. Then we've got 2 other gentlemen, Paul Walsh and Craig Webb, and both of them are extremely experienced from a military and police force background. and they'll be taking us through some of their experience and solutions and preventions when it comes to personal safety, security, and crowded places strategies. And then lastly, we've got the lovely Jemima Briggs from GM First Security that will also share some of her tricks and solutions and her experiences from a personal safety and security perspective. And that's also a different webinar on that. So we've got 2 webinars on similar subjects, but completely different perspectives, guys. So I think it's worthwhile attending both if you want to. So enough about that. I'll just shoot into the first poll. So if you give me 2 secs, let me just launch the first poll. Guys, the first poll question is a single answer question only, so only one answer. And I'll read the question out to you. So 1 sec, let me just pop that up, relaunch poll. There we go. So single answer, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being perfect, guys, how would you rate your organization's clarity in communicating its vision, mission, and purpose to all employees? We'll give you a couple of seconds for that one. Right, let's give another 5 seconds. And poll. So there's the results. Interesting. 3, 4, 17. So we've got a couple of 9 to 10s. Oh, that's brilliant. That's really brilliant. So a couple of 5 to 6, 7, 8. Awesome. Okay. Then second poll question, guys. This one is a multi-answer, so please select all that is relevant. Here we go. What forums do you have in place that work effectively to gauge staff well-being on a high-frequency basis? Coaches, mentors, one-on-one conversations, weekly feedback reports, regular well-being surveys, scheduled mental health events. And I'm sure there's others as well. Unfortunately, we couldn't list all. Let's give another 10 seconds for those extra to put in their answers. Okay, so just sharing the results with everybody. So coaches and mentors, oh, good representation on one-on-ones. Weekly feedbacks, great. Regular well, scheduled mental health events. Oh, that's interesting to see. That's quite a good number. And then, guys, I'm just going to stop sharing. And then just the last 4 questions for now. This one, yet again, is a single answer. And here we go. On a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being perfect, how would you rate your organization on its ability to coach and care for leaders? We'll give another couple of seconds. Sharing the results quickly. Interesting. What are your thoughts there, John?
Yeah, interesting. I mean, the previous question, the one-on-ones, was fascinating for me. It's yeah, that's a gold standard. That's a big tick as far as I'm concerned. But yeah, interesting. I mean, whenever we get results on the 1 to 2 or 1 to 5 range, you know, my normal reaction is, uh-oh. But I'll expand on that as we talk today.
Yeah, excellent. Okie dokie. So then, guys, we'll have one more poll question, as I mentioned, but that will come towards the end. Just now, as I mentioned, we've got John, the Chief People Mechanic from Think Farm. He has a diverse wealth of experience in leadership space, including broadcasting, writing, workshop facilitator, and even presenter. So he's done quite a bit, and we are really honored to have him here on today. And thank you, John, for taking the time. And we really appreciate it, that you're sharing your knowledge and experience with us today. And without further ado, John, the floor is yours, and I'll be in the background for anybody that needs assistance.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks, Wes. I appreciate that. I'll just get rid of that doofer angle there. All right, and we'll jump into it. Hey, fantastic, guys. There is Q&A later on. Also, the slides will be available to you in a PDF form if you want them, and you're more than welcome to have that. I'm not precious about my IP. Well, not much anyway. Look, you might notice as we go on today, there were some spelling mistakes in my slides. If you do notice that, then Mrs. Donovan was my standard 4 teacher. I'll send you her email address, and you can address that with her. Hey, I believe a very, very simple thing, that the quality of the current state of our leadership and the leaders that we are growing, it determines the outcome of our future of our organizations. And if we're paying no attention to training our leaders, then we're in trouble for the future. And I want to unpack a little bit about that and how that impacts the conversation for today. So the Think Farm, just all it does is think about leadership and how we can improve the quality of leaders, and particularly with the conversation today, how we can care for leaders. And I'll talk a bit about that as we go through. So we provide leadership coaching, one-on-one and group coaching, workshops, and development programs. So we're identifying people with leadership potential. And it's a great belief of mine that we need to be looking at potential development way sooner than most people do, just so we make sure that we've got great succession planning. The last surviving Sherpa of the 1953 successful summit of Everest with Sherpa Tenzing Norgay and Sir Edmund Hillary was Kancha Sherpa. And he said this: it's never been about the summit, it's always been about returning home safely. And of course, being in the health and safety business, that's what it's about, right? Making sure that our employees, the people who we love to work with, go home safely and well, physically, emotionally, intellectually, on a daily basis, and come back tomorrow raring to go again. I unfortunately are dealing with 2 port companies at the moment, and you'll see they're in the news with 2 deaths, one in Littleton, one in Auckland. These are tragic circumstances, but there are some answers to that, and I believe it's part of what I'm going to talk about today. And those were really unfortunate coincidences. I know both the CEOs, or the CEO of Auckland Port and the acting CEO of Littleton, and they are personally devastated people, as are the boards, as you can imagine. Big families. Littleton has 700 people, but it's a little family when it comes to people who are injured and passing away. Never been about the summit. It's always been about returning home safely. I provide some frameworks, and I want to share a framework with you about what we need to be looking at in terms of leadership and about engaging people in conversations. There are 6 very simple mantras, if you like, that I have, and in no particular order. We start with communication. I believe that great leadership and great communication are synonymous terms. Very, very hard to lead well in 2022 if you're a poor communicator. Communication is at the forefront of most issues and problems that we face. And I think almost the entire mediation industry is based on the whole subject of poor communication, mismatched expectations, and having no clarity. So the key word here for this mantra is clarity. The second one is the greatest gift that I think one human can offer another one, is for them to feel a sense of value. And the key word there is belief. What do we believe about people's value? What do we believe about people's intrinsic giftedness that they bring to work every day? And I'm going to highlight this word today. The third one, which is really important for me, is that when leaders rise, everyone rises. The kind of little anecdote I use is when you can fly away on your holiday, when you board the plane, who do you hope is the healthiest? Well, it's a rhetorical question because of course the answer is the pilot, right? We want the people flying the aircraft to be the healthiest. And I have a sneaky suspicion that when you're growing up through your career as a profession, as a professional, someone else is generally tasked with caring for you. When you cross into senior leadership, the evidence of care towards you vanishes almost completely. And that's not good enough, because we need our leaders to be really healthy to lead our organizations. And not only just in an emotional, physical health kind of quotient, but also in intellectual health and leadership capacity. I talk about leadership intelligence. No organization will grow above the capability of their senior leaders. So we need to have our leaders well. And the key word I use there is connection. A lot of leaders are isolated, and not in a good sense, in a bad sense. So we talk about that as part of our framework of leadership. Fourthly, and this links into the second one, is that behavior follows belief. What I believe about you is the way that I'm going to practice. And a really quick example is if I believe that you are a waste of my time, the chances are you won't get opportunity, you won't get promotion opportunities, you won't get professional development, you'll get left in the back seat. However, if I believe that you've got huge potential, that you've got great value, and the chances are I'll offer you all the professional development, leadership opportunities, growth opportunities. And the key word here is intention. And I'll highlight this as we go on. What is my intention towards the people that I care for? Exposure is my number 5. And again, not in any particular order, but I think what's happening in a burnout environment, we're not listening to enough thinking, research, and innovation conversation. And again, I'll touch on this today. We need to unveil our imagination. You know, when you look around the room that you're sitting in, everything around you, literally everything, has come out of imagination, creativity, and iteration. Someone thought about how I could make that better. And that's really the key of the conversation today. How do we make it better for ourselves, for our staff, for our customers, our suppliers? How do we make sure that we're delivering better? And I use a word which some people don't like, and that is excellence. I believe that we should be moving towards excellence, but that comes with exposure to conversations about other thinking, other research, and other innovative practices. My 6th mantra, if I do say so myself, I think is the greatest mantra I've ever written. And it's simply this: coffee fixes everything. Now, this is about getting together. This is about having conversations. That's why those poll results on one-on-one conversations for me are outstanding, because it's not, unfortunately, it's not true industry-wide. And people are being ignored on a one-to-one basis. But I do believe that coffee fixes everything. We've got to slow down and spend time together. And one of the most offensive words at the moment in leadership is the word time. And that's equated with another 4-letter word, which is the word busy. And one of my jobs is to unpack that with people and make sure that they're not busy so they can lead and they can breathe. And we'll touch on that today. So I want to talk about our capacity to lead and how this moves into what I call curiosity. So your capacity to learn determines your capacity to lead. You know, we need to be lifelong learners. We need to be committed to the idea of continuing to research and to grow and to push ourselves. And there's some really good research around why that's so important. But your ability to learn is built on one simple choice, I believe, and that is the choice to become curious. Our job is to become professionally curious. And the single most sought after skill in leadership today is that topic, curiosity. Do I have leaders who are pushing into the unknown space, who are thinking about change, about development, about excellence and improvement? Some of you may have read Jim Collins' book, kind of a leadership tome now, Good to Great. In that book, he says this. He says, my job is to lift the rocks, even if what I see scares the hell out of me. You can imagine going to the beach, you lift the rocks, you see all the squiggly things. Some of the things excite you, some of the things don't excite you. But this is about having great feedback processes. And Ken Blanchard, who is a thought leader in the servant leadership space, and I'm a great proponent of a servant leadership role. You know, how can I use my resources to help you rather than you bowing down to me as a senior leader? But he says this: feedback is the breakfast of champions. And I really like that. But, you know, feedback is predicated on 3 things. We've got to hear the good, the bad, and the ugly. If we just stop at the good, then we're going to be in trouble. We need to hear everything. And as leaders, we need to have the confidence and the security in ourselves to hear everything so we can make good decisions and good change. So why should we become curious? Well, I think it's a very simple thing for me in leadership. Is that in leadership, our job is to know why, and then to respond. And in the health and safety context, our job is to know what people are doing, why they're doing it the way they're doing it, and to bring change if we need to. Simple kind of protocol, but I think this applies to every aspect of leadership. We need to know why, and then respond. This is a famous sculpture by a Chinese artist. It's called Walking. You know, I say about leaders, you know, we don't get the opportunity, we don't get the chance to walk on by. When we see things that are going on, we must make change. It's incumbent on us to instigate change. And what I really want to know about people is I want to know what obstacles prevent them from moving towards an excellence of practice. I want to know what gets in people's way so I can use my resources to move those obstacles and get people moving and functioning. Now, this is a quote from a recent study actually on change in society, and I find this fascinating. At the heart of social progress is the human capacity to notice discrepancy between how things are and how they might be. Certainly such progress requires more than simply this realization. It requires the belief that change is possible and change is right. It requires social cooperation and work by groups for the common good. But these activities would never occur without someone at some point, that's you and I, noticing that things could be better. That profoundly difficult lives could be good and good lives could be better. Thus, the human capacity to imagine and envision a better or ideal life is linked to the emergence of social progress. I think that's a great quote. We're in the business of recognizing and making change. One of the questions that I ask organizations that I work with is to have a look at the way they currently practice and ask a simple question. What do we know that doesn't work? Unfortunately, a lot of us are used to systems and process, and we can become, I think, institutionally blinded, organizationally blinded by the way that we practice various processes and procedures. And the simple question I ask is what we're doing, is it fit for purpose? Now, if our purpose in health and safety is to make sure that we know what people are thinking, feeling, and experiencing, are our current practices fit for purpose? Are our systems fit for purpose? And unfortunately, quite often we come up with the answer, well, no, they're not. But that's great, right? Because we get to bring change. We get to instigate, you know, better in the conversation, better in the processes. And this comes back to a very simple piece of psychology called the theory of constraints. So the theory of constraints is a management approach that considers that at any given time, an organization is limited from achieving its highest goal by a single constraint. The hypothesis is that every complex system consists of multiple activities, one of which acts as a constraint upon the entire system. And you may have found that to be true. And for me, working with people, we might talk about systems, but it comes back to people. It comes back to people's permission and people's belief systems, is that people prevent change, prevent things from being released because of their ideology. And again, behavior follows belief in this particular case. So we need to find out what prevents us from moving forward and make those changes. I said it's about communication, and I believe that what I describe as a higher profitability of outcomes. See, for me, all the work I do is aimed at if you look at my flowcharts, they come down to two flowcharts at the bottom of the page. One is engagement and innovation, that I want a high level of engagement, which is going to deliver a high level of innovation in my organization, and that's going to give us a higher profitability of outcomes. Now, whether you're an NGO, whether you're a DHB, or whether you're a profit company, we want higher profitability on all our outcomes. If we talk simply in terms of occupational safety and health, what do I want? I want 100% people going home well. So it doesn't matter what the outcome you're looking for. The way I look at it is we're driving a high level of engagement and a high level of innovation, and that's going to deliver the right results that we want. Disengagement, of course, in the workforce, it continues to be a major problem for us. The results of studies, multiple studies, talk about the 30-50-20 rule, which is 30% of people are paddling a canoe, 50% are sightseeing, and 20% are trying to cut holes in the bottom of the canoe. And this is a real problem for us. So 70%, over 2/3 of our populations, are actively disengaged, according to studies. I'll touch on this one really briefly. One of the things I love about negative data is an absolutely fantastic opportunity to flip it around 180% and provide some really solid tools and directions to work in. But if people work in a miserable job which restrains engagement and contribution to innovation, it's based on three simple things. People are unknown. People don't know who they are. The anonymity. There's no clear measurement performance, so they don't know where they are in terms of their contribution. And thirdly, the vision and the purpose of the organisation is not communicated clearly, so people don't have a communicated purpose and meaning. And that for me is also a very critical issue to engage people and have them moving forward. And any of these things I'm happy to unpack for you at another time in more depth. Gallup recently published a study talking about some interesting stats on vision and meaning and purpose. They said 22% of employees believe the leadership of their organisation, only 22% of employees believe the leadership of their organisation has a clear direction for their organisation. That's tragic. Secondly, only 15% of employees strongly said the leadership of their organisation makes them excited about the future. And lastly, only 13% of employees agree that the leadership of their organisation communicates effectively with the rest of the organisation. Now, you have to say in brackets here, I'm not saying that these organisations don't have great vision or don't have great leadership. Well, what they're saying here is they're not communicating that. They're not inviting people on the journey. They're not exciting people to come on the journey with them. And that is a critical issue when it comes to engagement and innovation. To that point, I believe that there are 4 really, really critical roles that leaders should be involved in, and one of them is creating and communicating vision. Secondly, executing strategy, coaching potential in people, and these things all sit around the whole idea of inspiring trust to come on the journey that the organisation is going on. But again, creating vision and communicating vision is really, really critical in the conversation. I love this quote from George Bernard Shaw: "The single biggest issue in communication is the illusion it has taken place at all." And when I do surveys on communication with organisations, I find quite often that the communication quotient is really, really low. We think we've communicated, we've employed PR people, we've done all the right graphics, but actually we haven't communicated our message in a way that brings people on board. And that's a great opportunity to change the way that we're doing things. So when I talk about frameworks for leadership, I'm going to give you a very simple framework, which I think helps us to understand where we need to be. If the goal of my organisation is better outcomes, and again, regardless of what that is, whether it's widgets, whether it's fiscal, whether it's people, people safe days, whatever it is, it starts with better communication. Better communication gives us a better quality of relationships. Better relationships give us access critically to better information, better data. If I get better information and better data, I'm always going to make better decisions, and that naturally flows on to better outcomes. But it starts with this whole area of better communication and developing better relationships. But the gap between the two things is what I call the air gap or the knowing gap, actually understanding who people are and what they're thinking. What are we actually communicating to people? And for me, it is a critical area. If we don't have clear communication between and building better relationships, what we do is we leave people in an unclear space, which is assumptive behaviour, rumours, innuendo, lies, mistrust, and confusion. This is why I believe that communication is the kind of foundation building blocks. When people don't have clarity, when they have ambiguity, 3 things happen. You get fight, you get flight, and you get freeze. And none of these things are any good for moving forward with organisational outcomes. And I just say this: ambiguity is one of our greatest enemies, because people will not follow you into confusion. Their psychology is really clear. When people are confused, often they just sit and spin in circles, right? Some fight, some flight, but most people just simply freeze. Clarity is really key in what people are engaged in. So if we don't have accurate data, and this is a big issue, I think, within communication, if we get delayed data or inaccurate data, incomplete data, we're actually making decisions out of delusion. You think about your child's progress at school. If you're not hearing the truth about their progress, then we're making decisions and assumptions about them, which are just delusional. We have to have accurate data. And when I talk about not delayed data, if you think about 2020, how people were in January of 2020, if we didn't know how they were until December of 2020, right, we were working out of delusion, because people changed radically in the way they were. So frequent, small catch-ups for me is a really, really important thing, knowing how people are. You can have what I call the high rise of lies, and I've experienced this on multiple occasions. And this is simply just about the fact that I don't want to tell you the truth because I don't want to look bad to you. So you get prettied information, you feed that information up the scale. So again, we're working on delusional information. This is why the good, the bad, and the ugly is so jolly important, is that we've got to make great decisions based out of factual information. This is kind of predicated on the way that we consider feedback. And I think feedback is the most vital aspect in hearing the truth. And that comes down to a simple position. Are we punitive with feedback? That is, people are afraid to tell us the truth because they're going to get their backsides kicked. Or is feedback a growth-based process? That is, if there's a mistake being made, it's a vital learning process. And how you hear is really predicated on one of those two topics. If it's punitive, you're not going to hear the truth, or you're going to hear it delayed, or you're going to hear it filtered. But if it's growth-based, the chances are you'll hear the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, if people know it is a growth-based exercise. And our aim, of course, is to build the highest level of trust so that your team will tell you simply anything. That is the goal that we should be having as leaders, to build that level of trust. So this delusion gap is where we stray from reality into assumptive behavior, and that's just really never helpful. If we give clarity, we'll gain clarity back. People will give us good information back again if we give them good information in the first place. You want their brains functioning at a really high, clear rate. To give you, and it's what I call the Bermuda Triangle of communication. Sometimes it just falls into a black hole. We never know what's happened to it. I want to give you an example of poor communication. And the example is the example of the Titanic. And I say the iceberg was innocent because the iceberg didn't strike the Titanic. Of course, the Titanic struck the iceberg. The truth about the Titanic story is a fascinating one. For 6 weeks prior to the maiden voyage of the Titanic, there was a fire burning in a coal bunker in the bottom of the ship. And the fire could not be put out. So in the end, all they did was seal up the coal bunker and the fire burnt itself out. But if you know anything about basic physics, fire and steel are not a good mix. The infrastructure of the Titanic was compromised. The ship was never going to make it across the Atlantic. The steel infrastructure was compromised by the heat. It had weakened the steel. But you look at the three aspects of that story and we see fear, pride, and of course this fire going on. And if I explain that, is that there was a fire going on which the owners of the White Star Line, the owners of the Titanic, kept secret. Launching that ship was more important than acknowledging there had been a problem. So ego facilitated blindness in this situation, and pride and reputation overrode the need for disclosure. So this was a disaster. Those people were always going to die. And sometimes we inherit cultures which have, unfortunately, secrecy around them. And we need to beat those to death, right? We need to open up conversations and make sure that people are having great open conversations. Secondly, there was a pair of binoculars locked in a cabinet on the bridge. And the officer of the watch tried to get the key, and the person who was holding that key was asleep. And that person was feared. So they feared actually waking that person up, that officer waking them up. If they'd had binoculars, they would have seen their way through the iceberg field. So the fear of individuals and people holding power, which is inaccessible, is a really critical issue. But again, the iceberg was an unrecoverable incident once that happened. Thirdly and lastly, there were faulty belief systems which confused potential help. You might remember other ships were informed by radio and by Morse code that the Titanic was in trouble, but they laughed it off because they knew the Titanic was quote unquote unsinkable. Not only that, there were insufficient resources in place to effect a rescue because no one believed that sinking was a valid possibility. Well, I can tell you there's a fascinating study done by Harvard University called The Reason Why Organizations Don't Learn from Success. And the simple conclusion is this: success doesn't ask the same soul-searching questions that failure does. When we fail, we have inquiries, we have endless meetings and reports, and we have an autopsy of what went wrong. When we succeed, we simply make the conclusion we're really good at doing what we do. So we don't ask the depth of questions. And if you want to get a hold of a copy of that report, I'm happy to send it to you. It's a fascinating unpack of success and failure. So the dangers of isolation, of leaders becoming inaccessible, means sometimes we don't get the information we need to get from leaders. Pride is a crippling thing when it comes to change and making sure that our systems are robust and are wrestled with. And thirdly, there's a danger of unresolved deficits, unresolved conflicts within an organization. Sometimes staff sitting with unresolved resentments who are trying to sink your ship. And quite often when I go into an organization, one of the first questions I ask the senior leadership team is, what resentments do you know exist within this company? Who's sitting on a resentment that could sink your ship? And believe me, there are some embarrassing, red-faced conversations, because everyone knows what they are. We're just too afraid to tackle them. But I believe that we need to tackle them. So I talked about this briefly. When leaders rise, everyone rises. And the question you could flip is simply, who loves the lovers of people, right? If you're a leader and you're tasked with caring for people, who cares for you? And again, for me, this is a critical issue. Our leadership have to be well, physically, emotionally, spiritually, intellectually. You've got to be well. And I think the health of leadership is critical to the health of any organization. You can't have sick people leading healthy organizations. It just doesn't work that way, because culture comes down from the top. And the way that leaders approach mental health and well-being is a critical aspect of the conversation. I say this crazy thing here. I simply say, if you're going to be awake at 2 o'clock in the morning, it's better to dance and to drink champagne, not thinking about putting out fires. And I said before, one of the critical feedback I get from leaders is, I don't have enough time and I'm really busy. And that's not the way that leadership should work, right? I make the comment at conferences: if you are overloaded as a senior leader, the chances are someone in your organization, or probably lots of people, are not doing the jobs they're paid for, or it's not fit for purpose. We just don't have the right people in the right place doing the right things, or we need more people. Because again, if you're overloaded, it's going to cause you a problem. This comes down to, I think, a really simple thing for me, that if we want high performance, we must have high pastoral care. The two things for me are absolutely linked. And there's a greater demand now on high performance, but there should be a greater demand on high pastoral care. When we talk about the haora, the well-being of the full person, this is a critical conversation, and one which we need to be considering. So I measure people's leadership, particularly, I measure their well-being in 5 different areas. And that's the emotional, physical, intellectual, relationship, and professional. And I just simply say, if you're overloaded, stressed, and distracted, at some point your ship will actually go down, and that's a horrific thing. But if we look at what these things are attributed to, physical is pretty easy. We know if we've got energy and enthusiasm. We know when that tank is running low. The rule on intellectual well-being is that if you've stopped watching YouTube clips on on growth, on learning, on professional development, if you're not watching TED Talks, but you're pigging out on Netflix, the chances are that your intellectual hunger is compromised. I look at 2 sets of relational satisfaction and health. So how am I getting on with people at home? How am I getting on with my partner? Am I finding myself hiding away? Am I becoming scratchy? Am I becoming unkind? These are indicators of our burnout, and that our well-being is low. And the same at work, right? I mean, how am I getting on with people? Am I hiding from people? Am I becoming sharp in my answers? Am I becoming unkind? And thirdly, and this is a critical one, is how's my emotional health? And this is becoming really, really, really important, because there's a balance which is required between your what I call emotional prosperity, and I'm just going to pull up on the slide for a moment, excuse me. There's a balance between high empathy and high emotional prosperity. And I've been doing some personal research around leaders in critical organizations, particularly in emergency services, and how can they do their job in the face of really emotional and dangerous trauma situations. Talked to a guy who's a senior station officer in the fire service, who said in order to turn up to accidents where people have been maimed, killed, and sometimes bodies in pretty bad conditions, they have to be slightly callous and they have to be slightly removed. The problem we've got is that our cohort of staff are demanding that leaders become, in this day and age, become more empathetic. So there is a rising level of anxiety within society, and there's this rising what I call therapeutic expectation that leaders have to become more caring, more kind, and more empathetic. Well, the problem with that is that we're facing a tsunami of emotional damage. So our emotional capacity has to be high in order to balance that. And so for leaders, you know, if you're an organization that has 50 or 100 people, that's 50 or 100 little emotional situations going on, right? Things are going on at home, things are going on in the workplace, COVID, isolations. I mean, all the things that you're aware of, you have to be really well to deal with those things. So these are critical things for me. So we look at to the belief and the intention and how that plays out. And for me, there's a really, really important thing here that we need to consider. And this is something to sort of muse on when you get the notes. But I just say that when you enter the room, 3 people walk in with you. One we call performance, one we call behavior, and one I call value. And the problem with this is that performance is based on output, and behavior is often associated with the way that you present yourself. But value we don't often talk about. But what we've been trained to do generally as leaders is to adjust people's performance and their behavior. And that can be difficult. Whereas I believe if you address people's value first, conversations regarding performance and behavior will simply follow on, but not if we try it the other way around. There's also a 4th person in the conversation that doesn't come to work, and that's the person we call struggle. That's the stuff which is going on at home that we don't know about. And again, we're encountering record levels of anxiety from outside the workplace. If you've got a partner who has COVID, or a family member whose health is compromised, or potentially someone has died through COVID, I mean, there are things that people are struggling with that we might not be aware of. So there's a simple word that I use, and I think it applies right across the workspace, and that is we need to consider that people are irreplaceable. Now, that's not indispensable. I mean irreplaceable. And, you know, and if you said to an employee, I believe you are irreplaceable, it's a very powerful word for me. That means they're recognizing that there's no one like them, that they're individual in their journey, their experience, their story, their giftedness, the way they present themselves. They are irreplaceable. And we don't buy into the lie that if you leave, they'll just replace you with someone else. Well, actually, you can't replace anyone with anyone else because there's no 2 people alike. People are irreplaceable. Yes, we can find someone else to do that job, but that's not the same thing. And I think we need to really start communicating to people that they are irreplaceable. And this is about rehumanizing the workplace, people really understanding the value that they have, and they're not a commodity. Now, this is probably all teaching grandmothers to suck eggs for you guys. You'll understand this stuff. But I'm having to reinforce this with people all the time. We need to rehumanize what we're doing. And so when people lose sight of the value of who they are, they can become unkind and they can become bullying. And when people lose sight of the value in what they do, they burn out and they run out, they leave. One of my jobs and my stints as an advisor to the New Zealand Bullying Prevention Stakeholders Group, which is a terrible name, but they've got a great mission, is to understand why people bully and how to prevent that happening. And it's an area of expertise that I have if you want to have a conversation about that. But for me, it comes down to a conversation of value. When someone loses the sense of value of who they are, they try and steal it by being unkind to other people. And that is a long conversation, but I'd love to have that with you at some point. So if people have high value, that equates to higher engagement and higher innovation, and that leads again to the profitability of outcomes when people feel that they have higher value. Well, this comes down to ideology of leadership. You can't separate organizational outcomes from leadership ideology. These things are linked together. And this is about those 2 key words, belief and intention. Do I believe you believe in my potential? That's a question people are asking of their superiors, of their bosses, of their direct reports. Do I believe you believe in my potential? And secondly, do I believe you have my best interest at heart? You know, if people come to work knowing that you have their best interest at heart, the chances are they're going to perform at a very high level. Interestingly enough, one of the key pieces of research around engagement talks about the fact that 89% of leaders surveyed believe staff leave wanting more money, whereas only 12% of employees state that money is actually in their top 5 reasons for moving on. The other 88% leave for psychological reasons, and you might be quite aware of this, and that there are 4 things. You don't trust me, you don't value me, you don't appreciate actually the contributions I make, and you simply don't listen to me. And in recent studies, this one is the most critical one. You don't listen to me. The chances are if you listen to someone, you'll understand their value, the trust, and the contributions that they make. So trusting is about their experience for me. Valuing is about who they are, the giftedness. Appreciating what they do is about goodwill. Now, last time I looked, the 40-hour working week was a nonsense, right? Most people I'm aware of work 50 or 60 or 70 or 80 hours a week. So that's in a goodwill space. They're not paid for that. We can say, oh, it's salary. Well, you and I both know that's BS, right? The salary is for 40 hours a week. So when they go up above and beyond, that's goodwill. And when we listen to them, we listen to their uniqueness, their unique perspective, the diversity of what they think is the critical thing. So again, negative data, perfect opportunity to make things right. And this is simply about being listened to and people being encouraged. So people who feel trusted, appreciated, valued, and listened to are highly engaged towards organizational outcomes and contribute at high levels into innovation, change, and excellence. And this simply comes down to motivation, what I call motivation by affirmation. That is telling people they're doing a great job, right? Encouraging people. And the cost of that is absolutely nothing. And that's the tragedy. People leave simply for the sake of someone saying, man, I love what you're doing. It's fantastic. Keep going. And this comes back to 3 really key things that I think that leaders do on a day-to-day basis, a moment-by-moment basis, is that we wear 3 hats that we're constantly swapping. One is that cheerleading hat that says, I love what you're doing, fantastic, keep going. One is the coaching hat that says, well, you're using a putter, and I think you really need to be using a wedge right now. It's a substantive thing. And the third thing, which I think is really, really critical in 2022, is what I call the chaplain's hat. That is, we need to go and have coffee. We need to sit down and have a conversation and find out what is going on. And the trouble is, if you are busy, then the chaplaincy hat will probably not get worn, and maybe the other 2 won't get worn either in a tangible way. So one of the problems with having conversations is we tend to spend time with people that we like. This is a quote from a man called Samuel Johnson. The quote was made about 1750, and he said this: kindness is in your power, even when fondness is not. And I just saw this quote recently and it really struck me. Sometimes we don't like hanging out with people we don't like, but actually kindness has got nothing to do with that. You can be kind to people that you're not fond of. It can be a challenge, but I think it's a critical thing. So again, this conversation is about making sure that we are in the right space with people, that we're talking to people, that conversation builds the knowledge of who they are, and conversation builds knowledge of what they know about their job and how important that is for us to understand on a day-to-day basis. And that will cost you time, and it will cost you proximity. It will simply cost you time, right? But time is your greatest asset because it allows access to people and knowledge. Again, I think coffee fixes everything. And people who feel, again, listened to and valued will show you where the best bones are buried. They'll lead you to innovative practices. And I think people who are happy in that space will search for opportunities to show what they've found. They'll be enthusiastic, and they'll be annoyingly enthusiastic about what they've found. One of the ways and one of the protocols that I teach people is, instead of having an open door policy, a lot of organizations say we have an open door policy, right? You can always come and tell me what's on your mind. Well, actually, I think what we need in this day and age is an empty desk policy, is that we need to go hunting for people, right, who have smart things to say, and just people who have things to say in general, just kind of hanging out, right, and finding what people are thinking, saying, and feeling. And I just say, if you want to stay ahead, you need to go digging, right? So the question is, what do we want to know? So there's a need to know, but what do we want to know? Well, there are 4 states of knowledge, I think, that we need to know, and I want to explain these. There's future knowledge. That's what we know we don't know yet, right? That's in the mystery space. There's current knowledge, which is what the current manual says we should be doing in our job. There's executed knowledge, which is what I call the collected lived experience, which tells us that the manual is of no value to us, because this is what we actually do on a day-to-day basis. And then there's obsolete knowledge, which is the knowledge that we know is no longer required. That no longer works in this organization. We've surpassed that. There are three other aspects of knowledge that we might want to know about. One is confined knowledge. That's knowledge that we can't see or is inaccessible because our systems or processes prevent it. They're complex or they're cumbersome. It's just too difficult to get that knowledge out. Secondly, is what I call restrained knowledge. Now, this is denied knowledge. This is information that people will not share with you. It's dangerous knowledge because I don't want you to know what I think, just in case it's detrimental to my job. And that's about, you know, working in delusion, right? That's about the Tower of Lies. We need to know what people are thinking without fear. And lastly, there's what I call flowing knowledge. There are conversations about how to make your organization better. You're just not invited to that conversation. That's the problem, right? It's being shared, but you're just not invited to the conversation. So we need to make sure that we're positioning ourselves so that we can hear those conversations. So how does this work? I want to break the four things down into two groups. What I call rising knowledge and what I call floating knowledge. Rising knowledge is knowledge that comes out of situational crisis, accidents. It's event-based and it's inconvenient knowledge. It's that bad and that ugly from the good, bad, and ugly. Right. And secondly, there's what I call floating knowledge, this is where the intentional curiosity of leaders kicks in. And it's what I call suspicious knowledge, right? And that means I have a suspicion there's a better way of doing this. I just have a suspicion there's another place we need to be, another product, another service, another market, you know, another methodology that we need to be. And these happen in two very different places. Rising knowledge is about listening, is about making opportunities for staff to talk to you, going looking for them, as I said. But future knowledge, floating knowledge, is about a thinking space. When I work with organizations, and let's just say you worked 50 hours a week, so 100 hours a fortnight, and you can laugh about that later. So if I asked you for 2% of your fortnight, that's 2 hours, that you diary that time with your leadership community and you go somewhere and you talk about two little words, right? What if? That is the conversation that we need to be having. What if this might change? Most organizations tell me that I'm crazy. 2 hours diaried a fortnight. Yet the most successful leaders on the planet, I can tell you from very recent research, spend up to 28% of their time alone in reflection, thinking, planning, and considering that question, what if? So I think, what if we missed that time? Then I think we're going to lose the idea that might lead to the idea. Right? We might not come up with a solution in those 2 hours, but we might come up with the idea that leads to critical, change-based, market-leading ideas. It is not going to happen by it floating to you on a basket. All right? It's not going to happen. You've got to go after it. So I want to leave you with a little story. I mean, essentially, I'm a storyteller. It's how I lead people. I tell stories because I think there's plenty of stories out there that encourage people. I don't need to invent anything new. But this is the story of Michelangelo and Michelangelo's David. This is where Michelangelo's David, and if I was sitting in front of you, I'd ask for a show of hands. Who's ever seen David in the flesh, in the marble as such? Well, he's remarkable, obviously. He's one of the most priceless objects on the face of the earth. Originally commissioned for the Cathedral of Florence, Michelangelo was 26 years of age when he was asked to complete what was the unfinished project of David. It had been begun in 1464 and again in 1475, but both previous sculptures had rejected this enormous block of marble because it presented what they called too many Tiroli, and Tiroli are imperfections in the marble. So this block of marble was covered up and left in the back blocks of the cathedral for 25 years untouched until a young Michelangelo, 26 years of age, comes along and is asked to carve the statue. Well, Michelangelo did not consider the imperfections of the raw material because his vision and his artistic skill were invested in the end result. Michelangelo was looking at David. He wasn't looking at the marble. And the irony is, of course, is that the beauty of marble is in its imperfection. That's a bath, by the way. The beauty of marble is in its imperfection. Carrara marble, if you don't know, is cut out of the Carrara Mountains, which is 125 kilometers up the coast from Florence. on the west coast of Italy. You can see by the scale of the track excavators there, I mean, they're ripping these mountains to pieces for this beautiful, beautiful marble, which is sought around the world. One of the mysteries of Michelangelo's David is 600 years ago, they moved a 30-ton block of marble 125 kilometers. I have no idea how they did that, but they did that. So here he is, David in all of his glory. And just to confirm, he's 5.17 meters tall. Can you imagine that? He's 17 feet tall, this guy, which is 1.5 Stephen Adams. He is a big sucker, right? He's huge. Michelangelo said about his David a fascinating thing. He said, I saw the angel in the marble and I carved until I set him free. And this is about people, right? This is about finding people's potential, finding their value and speaking into that value. He went on to say, every block of stone has a statue inside of it, and it's the task of the sculptor to discover it. So you and I are leaders, we are sculptors. It's our job to find out the value in people and to release that. And I think we must become fanatical about looking for the good in people. And this is about a culture of shared care, right? Is that when people know they're valued, they're going to contribute into the well-being of others around them. And I think that's pretty clear and obvious. But the conclusions from Michelangelo's David story are really easy. That despite the flaws, Michelangelo saw value in the stone, right? Despite the opinion of others, he saw value in this piece of stone. Is that a board of trusted advisors saw value and had belief in the artist. Someone had to say, yeah, I see the potential in you and I'm going to spend some time with you and develop you. You're never too old or too young to create something priceless. And lastly, flaws don't always disqualify the end that you are wanting. This is critical in looking after people and raising them. Hey, I've rushed through a best part of an hour for you, and again, this will be a YouTube clip, and those slides are available to you if you want them. Wes, I'm going to hand it back to you.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, John. Hi, everybody. Just before we start the question and answer session, one final poll question I'm launching now. But while we go through the poll question, please make sure if you've got any questions for John or myself, to ask them now. So, John, I do have one practical question, and that is, what advice can you provide for any particular average worker? You know, that how can he approach or a feared leader or a dismissive leader to be on their side?
Yeah, it's a great question, actually. And I think the answer to that is a question. If you ask somebody the question, hey, I really value your opinion on this problem that I'm having, when you make it about someone else, the chances are you break down the walls. And that works whether you're a leader trying to break through into a worker, so an employee who's being interesting, or a leader who's being a pain in the proverbial. You ask them that question, hey, I need some wisdom around this thing. I wonder if we could have some coffee and have a conversation. If a leader rejects that, then probably you need to take a contract out on them. But for me, that's the way to do it. We ask a question which actually transfers the energy and the power in the situation.
Thank you. We have another question here from Lisa. My question is, how important are good systems for supporting our leaders who are so busy rather than getting extra people?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that comes back to the topic of is it fit for purpose? And I really, really wholeheartedly believe that if we want healthy organizations, our leaders have to be rested. You know, if I was speaking to a room, I often work with principals, secondary principals, and I tell them their job is to drink brandy and smoke cigars. You know, I really believe that the job of the most senior leader in any organization should be to cast vision and raise up other leaders, right? Is to be thinking about where we're going and to raise up other leaders. If your leadership is bogged down with other stuff, then you need to look at processes. And that might mean new software, that might mean new trucks, it might mean a new building, it might just be that the substance of what we're working with is not suitable. The other option is that we kill those leaders off, is that they simply become overloaded and they burn out and they leave. And I know you're doing a webinar next week on burnout. And there's some really critical things, because some of the area I'm working in, medicine and education, burnout is at epidemic levels, let me tell you. A consulting psychiatrist at the Auckland DHB said to me very recently, a guy called Dr. Tony Fernando said all of his colleagues, so it's a big statement, all of his colleagues would walk out the door tomorrow and not come back if they had the opportunity. So we've got to get our leaders rested, and we've got to get them right if we want to be right. So it's a great question. Thank you.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. We've got another question pretty similar. How do you deal with managers who have the attitude of she'll be all right, Jack, when they are staff who have injured themselves?
Well, I mean, there is both moral and fiduciary legal responsibility. So, I mean, that's really difficult. I mean, if you think about the current situation with 2 ports who've lost staff members, if a leader is not feeling that, then that is a real problem, right? That is a major problem. I'm not sure that I want to work for an organisation where a leader doesn't care for people. That is a problem. Let me give that some more thought, because it comes down to that whole thing about behaviour follows belief. Is that if a leader believes that his people are valuable, they will put the procedures and processes in place to keep them safe. But so by not addressing that, a she'll be right attitude actually means they don't really care about your well-being, and that's unacceptable. So if you want to stay, that could be a very difficult choice. Private, and I'll give that some more thought, because that's a great question.
Yeah, thanks. If we go just to the next slide, before I go to the last question, guys, just all our details are on the next slide. You can contact John on that email address, or contact myself. Please watch out for our YouTube channel. Visit it. We'll have majority of our webinars and sharing sessions on there. And then, John, I've got another question here. And I do understand the privacy around this, but you can only share what you can share. And the question comes from Jerry saying, he's a bit interested in your learnings from your work with the ports on safety leadership. And what could you share in that aspect?
Yeah, not very much. What I can tell you is that the new CEOs, so Kirsty Gardner, who's the acting CEO at the Ports of Lyttelton, and Roger Gray, who is the brand new CEO at the Ports of Auckland, are both long life learners. They're both very senior, very experienced people who know they've got more to learn. And that's a critical aspect of where they need to go. The reason I was appointed by the board of Lyttelton Port to help them out was because of a death by bullying a couple of years ago, and the result of a Maria Dews, who was I think she's a QC, who was appointed for a coronial level inquiry. And really what was discovered, and for me no surprise, is that there had been no leadership training. Is that people had risen, and this is really, really common. It's common in medicine, it's common in education, and I think it's probably common everywhere, that people based on their skill set, on their occupational skill set, have been promoted into positions of leadership, and they have been abandoned in terms of leadership training. Leadership for me, and this is a really great question, I think, leadership for me is a profession. And you might be in a manufacturing industry, you might be in the medical profession, you might be in the military, it doesn't matter what you're in. The moment you step into a position of leadership, you're in the people business. That is the only business that you are in, and the welfare of people is your concern. But if we don't train leaders and have them understanding that, then all manner of disasters will ensue. And for both ports, there are really good people who've been appointed to positions of leadership who have never been trained in leadership. And we have treated leadership as a second-class profession, or something you do, I'm a team leader doing this and I'm also a leader. No. You have people that you're responsible for, you are a leader, and you need to learn the skills of leadership. That for me is the critical observation from the ports.
Excellent, thank you. Just concerned with time, guys. We've already 5 minutes past 1 o'clock. If there's any other questions, please send them through to myself or John, and we'll make sure to answer them. But before I go, I just want to take this opportunity to thank every single person that came today. I know everybody, like John said, that 4-letter word, busy, but we're taking the time to invest in today and how we can support our leaders of today as well. Thank you, John, for taking the time yet again and sharing your experience. And what you have to say was extremely valuable, not just for myself, but I'm sure for a lot on here today. So thank you very much yet again to you and everybody on here for today, and I hope to see you all soon. And before I say goodbye, I'll give John the opportunity to have one last word.
Yeah, thanks, Wes. I really appreciate it. Look, if you would, I appreciate you guys turning up today. Again, I know you're busy. If you'd like a copy of the slides, just email me, john@thethinkfarm.org. If you'd like a coffee, let's do that, because as you can tell, I'm very passionate about leaders and making sure that our people are well. So hopefully you've gained something from today. But please email me, and I'm more than happy to send you a copy of today's slides. Thanks, Wes.
Excellent. Yet again, thank you, everybody. Thank you, John. Next time, we'll see you again. Cheers.